He left her to marry the right woman. 5 years later, he saw 2 little girls with his eyes. If you believe in second chances and the power of fierce motherhood, smash that like button and subscribe. You are about to witness a powerful story of betrayal and a difficult road to redemption. Let us know if you think this CEO deserves a chance. The shocking hook. Don't get in my way. Clara Jenkins never imagined a single sentence could change the entire course of her life. Yet, as she stood in Elias Sterling's private office, surrounded by polished granite and floor-to-ceiling glass that showcased the city he ruled, she felt the air around her turn cold, sharp, and ruthless. His presence once made her feel safe, adored, chosen. But now the man she loved looked at her as if she were an inconvenience blocking the path to his flawless future. He was the epitome of success. Dark hair perfectly slicked back, a costly suit tailored to perfection, and brown eyes that usually burned with ambition, but today held nothing but irritation and impatience. She had rehearsed every possible way to tell him the truth growing inside her, a truth she had carried alone for weeks while summoning the courage to speak it. 2 heartbeats pulsed beneath her own, small and innocent, and full of possibility. She pressed her trembling fingers against her stomach, as if the touch could lend her strength. She wanted to envision his excitement, the shock followed by joy, the way he might smile and pull her into his arms, while whispering that everything would be fine. Instead, her fantasy shattered before she could even open her mouth. "Don't get in my way. I'm marrying someone else." His voice was low, yet vicious in its finality, a statement meant to pierce through any hope she had left. He didn't shout. He showed no anger. His indifference was worse than cruelty. Clara blinked, feeling her heart fracture with an intensity she swore the entire building must have heard. She stared at him, searching for even a glimmer of warmth, a sign that this was a moment he would regret, that he still remembered the nights they shared, their laughter, the way he once looked at her as if she were the only person who truly understood him. Instead, she watched him reach for his jacket with calm confidence, as if he hadn't just destroyed the life forming inside her. She took a step toward him, her lips parting, ready to speak the truth that might save them both from future suffering. Yet the words froze on her tongue when he held up a hand slightly, already dismissing her as if she were nothing more than a mistake he wished to erase. His eyes moved from her to his calendar on the desk, his next meeting, his next conquest in the world of power and wealth. In that moment, she realized he didn't see her at all. She was invisible in the story he chose to live. The wound was so intense it nearly stole her breath. Her vision swam with tears, which she refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of him. Pride was the only shield she had left. Clara straightened her shoulders, wrapped her trembling arms tightly around herself, and forced her legs to move. She walked toward the door with as much grace as she could muster, refusing to crumble until she was away from his gaze. She paused for a fraction of a second, waiting, yearning, praying for him to utter her name. He didn't. She stepped out into the hallway, and only then did the tears spill over, hot and uncontrollable. The world outside his office kept turning as if nothing had happened, as if her heart wasn't shattered behind those closed doors. She hurried toward the exit, one hand still protectively covering her stomach. She whispered an apology to the small lives growing inside her, silently promising them she would love them enough for all 3, that she would fight to give them a future even if their father chose not to know them. Outside, the city lights blurred through her tears, turning the world into a smear of brilliant, distant dreams. She felt utterly alone, terrified beyond measure, but she refused to let the fear win. Clara wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand. She took a deep breath that tasted of pain and resolution, and she kept walking. Every step away from Elias felt like a battle against gravity, but also a stride toward something she didn't yet understand. She wouldn't beg him to stay. She wouldn't tell him she was carrying his children. She wouldn't allow his coldness to define her or the beautiful lives inside her. He had chosen his path. Now she would choose hers, even if she had to build it with shaky hands and a heart held together only by fierce love and hope. That night she curled up alone, arms wrapped protectively around her belly, listening to the silent rhythm within her. It reminded her that she wasn't truly alone. 2 small miracles needed her, and she would give them everything she had, even the broken pieces of her heart, to ensure they never felt what she felt now. The future ahead looked dark and uncertain, but Clara promised her children she would survive it, no matter the cost. Interactive question. Do you think Clara made the right choice by not telling Elias about the twins? Or should she have risked his anger for the sake of the children knowing their father? What would your first move be if you were Clara? Tell us your thoughts below. Part 2. Twin girls and a single anchor. Pregnancy wasn't supposed to feel like a battle. Yet that every day for Clara became a test of how much a human heart can endure before breaking irreparably. She worked as many hours as her body allowed, hiding morning sickness behind a strained smile, and ignoring the whispers of co-workers who noticed how pale and exhausted she had become. She never complained, because the moment she placed her hand on her growing belly, all the fear and loneliness briefly vanished, replaced by an overwhelming love that gave her the strength to carry on. She found solace imagining what her daughters would be like, visualizing 2 small faces tucked against her chest, 2 pairs of hands grasping her fingers, 2 reasons to keep breathing even when life demanded more than she had. Medical bills mounted faster than she could pay them. She sacrificed meals to save money, choosing canned soup while ensuring adequate vitamins and nutrition for her unborn children. She read every parenting book she could borrow from the library, seeking guidance to help her raise twins alone. Nights were often sleepless, not from discomfort, but because fear whispered that she might fail them. She never allowed those thoughts to linger. She whispered back with determination that she would become everything they needed, even if she had no one to catch her when she fell. The day the doctor told her she was expecting identical twin girls, Clara wept tears she had held back for months. The ultrasound image showed 2 perfectly formed babies nestled together, their tiny hearts beating strong and steady. The doctor smiled and congratulated her, unaware that the father of these children had chosen a different family before he even knew they existed. Clara pressed the printout to her chest once she was alone, studying it as if memorizing the proof that love still existed in her world. She made a silent promise that her daughters would always feel wanted, always feel cherished, and that no one would ever be allowed to make them doubt their worth. When Hazel and Holly were born, the delivery room was filled with chaos and joy all at once. Clara had no partner to hold her hand, no soothing voice to tell her she was doing great. Instead, she gritted her jaw, screamed up at the sterile ceiling, and pushed through every contraction, with the primal knowledge that she was fighting for the 2 lives that were entirely dependent on her strength. Then, suddenly, the cries of 2 newborns filled the air, and everything else disappeared. Nurses handed her 2 squirming miracles, pink and whimpering, and Clara felt her heart expand until it ached. They were more beautiful than anything she had ever seen, with soft brown wisps of hair already starting to appear, and wide, curious brown eyes that blinked up at her with an innocence that squeezed her chest. Holding them for the first time was like finally coming home after being lost for too long. She named them Hazel and Holly, choosing names that felt strong yet sweet. names she hoped would match the brave, bright futures she wanted for them. Even through exhaustion, even through the pain in her body and the fear of being alone, Clara felt a love so powerful it almost frightened her. She whispered promises into their hair, telling them she would be their mother, father, and protector. They clung to her with instinctive trust, tiny fingers wrapping around hers like anchors that kept her from tumbling into despair. Motherhood was not gentle in the months that followed. Clara quickly learned that sleep became a luxury she was rarely afforded. Nights blurred into an endless cycle of feedings, crying, soothing, and diaper changes, while days were spent working just enough to keep food on the table. She often held one baby in one arm while preparing bottles with the other, singing lullabies through pure exhaustion. Yet every small milestone, a first smile, a tiny laugh, the way Hazel always sought Holly's hand before falling asleep, was a reward far greater than rest or comfort. As the girls grew, their personalities blossomed like flowers in uneven sunlight. Hazel was bold and spirited, always the first to crawl, the first to climb, fearless in ways that sometimes terrified Clara. Holly was thoughtful and observant, studying everything with solemn curiosity before daring to move. Though identical, Clara could tell them apart instantly, not by look, but by the way their souls seemed to shine differently. The financial struggles never ceased. Clara counted every penny, sacrificing new clothes for herself, skipping doctor's appointments she should have attended, and refusing to ask anyone for help. Pride had become her armor, but it was her daughter's well-being that gave her the reason to keep fighting. She created a home for them, small, imperfect, but filled with warmth. Drawings decorated the walls, soft toys filled their bedroom, and the apartment echoed with the sound of two little girls discovering happiness in a world that expected them to have less. Sometimes late at night, when the twins were asleep and the apartment finally quiet, Clara allowed herself to remember Elias. She would lie awake wondering if his life was still so perfectly aligned with his ambitions, if he ever felt the absence of the family he didn't know he had. On those nights, the pain returned, sharp and relentless, but she refused to dwell on it for long, because she had learned the most important truth. She could survive without him. Hazel and Holly were 5 now, bright and effervescent, 2 perfect reflections of the man who had turned his back without hesitation. Clara ensured they were never lacking in love, even when money was scarce. The girls thrived, their laughter loud, their spirits unbroken, and their hearts full. They didn't know the story of their origins, and Clara hoped she could delay that difficult truth for as long as possible. She often caught herself studying their faces, thinking the world had given her 2 perfect reasons to keep believing in beauty, even after the ugliest moment of her life. And though she didn't know it yet, fate was preparing to test her darkest fears and her deepest hopes again. The past she tried so hard to outrun was not finished with her. She would soon find herself face to face with the man she once loved, and nothing would ever be the same. Part 3. The inevitable collision. Elias Sterling had built a life that looked perfect from the outside, polished and brilliant, like the skyline reflected in his penthouse glass walls. Yet anyone looking closely would have seen the emptiness settling behind his confident smile. After the wedding that was supposed to secure his future, he quickly learned that a marriage built on convenience and status could never satisfy a heart desperate for something real, something warm, something like the love he once discarded. His wife, Serena, was elegant, intelligent, and perfectly aligned with the world he had chosen. But love had never been part of their arrangement. Their conversations were formal, their dinners stiff and silent, and their touches always felt more like business dealings than affection. Less than 2 years after uttering their vows, they signed divorce papers with the same lack of emotion that characterized everything they did together. Nicholas excelled at the only thing he had left: work. He expanded his company's reach, collected awards, boosted profits, and garnered admiration from everyone in the finance sector. He convinced himself that ambition was enough. He tried to believe that the void in his life was simply the price of success. But every day felt more like he was playing a character instead of living a life. He attended lavish parties surrounded by people who lauded him. Yet he constantly found excuses to leave early, claiming urgent business matters, though in reality, he couldn't stand being surrounded by laughter that didn't belong to him. He occasionally went on dates, mostly women who saw him as a trophy or an opportunity, but no matter how they smiled at him, he never felt drawn to any of them. He tried to bury Clara in the deepest recesses of his mind, but memories of her surfaced at the most inconvenient times, refusing to fade. He remembered her laugh, genuine and free, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was trying not to cry, the softness in her eyes when she looked at him as if he were more than the ruthless businessman he tried so hard to become. He told himself leaving her was the right decision, that he had chosen a better path, that life was easier without the chaos of emotion. Yet, the weight of regret grew heavier by the year. Though he couldn't quite fathom why, he sometimes imagined what would have happened if he had stayed. The thought squeezed his chest uncomfortably, so he would push it away and drown himself in work. But as 5 years passed, something in him began to shift, slowly and without permission. He found himself watching families in parks, feeling a sharp pang in his heart when he saw fathers lifting their children, laughing into the air. He found himself pausing near toy stores, pretending he was just checking out new marketing strategies, while silently imagining what gifts he might choose if he ever had a child to give them to. The idea of family, once a threat to everything he valued, now felt like the only thing missing. One day, during a meeting where his team celebrated yet another successful quarter, Elias felt nothing. The applause around him, the congratulations, the expensive champagne being poured for toasts, it all slid over him like meaningless noise. He excused himself, walking away from his own celebration and staring at his reflection in the gleaming windows overlooking the city. He looked powerful, confident, enviable, and utterly miserable. He pressed his palm against the glass, realizing with sharp clarity that he could no longer recognize the person staring back. The loneliness became suffocating. His penthouse, once a symbol of victory, now felt like a prison. The silence within its walls grew louder every night, echoing everything he lost and everything he never allowed himself to want. He tried calling old friends, but conversations turned shallow in seconds. He had no one he could talk to honestly. He wondered if Clara was still in the same city, if she had moved on, if she was happy, if she hated him. He had no answers, and the not knowing gnawed at him like hunger. It wasn't until he was forced to attend a corporate event in a city park, a peace initiative with investors, that fate decided to stop giving him time to think. As he stood with business partners discussing development plans, the sound of carefree laughter reached him from a nearby playground. He ignored it at first, but the sound grew louder, clearer, impossible to overlook. He turned toward the noise and saw 2 little girls running across the grass, their joy bright and untamed, their arms outstretched like small birds taking flight. Something inside him stopped dead. He stared, unable to look away, because these 2 girls looked startlingly familiar. Their hair, a rich brown shade identical to his own, bounced as they ran, and when one of them spun her head, The sun caught their eyes. Brown, deep, expressive, unmistakable. His heart gave a painful lurch as recognition hit him with brutal force. He knew those eyes. He'd seen them in the mirror all his life. As his pulse thundered, he frantically searched for their mother, desperate for confirmation and terrified of the truth he already knew. And then he saw her. Clara, standing a few feet away, watching the girls with a smile that softened every part of her face. She looked stronger, more radiant than he remembered. Yet, he recognized the tiredness she tried to hide, the weight she carried alone. Elias felt his entire world tilt. 5 years of denial, ambition, and emotional distance collapsed beneath him in a single heartbeat. He understood exactly what he had done, and the knowledge almost made him fall to his knees. He had walked away from the only future that truly mattered, and fate had just delivered the reckoning he never expected, but desperately needed. Elias stood immobile, unable to move, barely able to breathe, as he watched the 2 little girls, who could only be his daughters. His heart was pounding so loudly he wondered if anyone else could hear it. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to go to them, to fall to his knees and beg forgiveness for not knowing, for not being there, for every single lost moment he could never reclaim. Yet fear rooted him to the spot. What if he was wrong? What if Clara refused to let him near them? What if these children looked at him with confusion or fear instead of recognition and love? For the first time in his life, he understood the terror of having something to lose. Clara noticed him only after several seconds. Her smile slowly vanished as her gaze followed the direction of his. The softness that had illuminated her face moments before was utterly gone, replaced by a wall of rigid caution and old wounds reopening in an instant. She stood still, protective instinct surging through her like a wildfire, and in one fluid motion, she softly called the girls over. They both turned at her voice and immediately ran to her, oblivious to the storm brewing between the adults who once shared a life-altering connection. Clara crouched down to embrace them, an arm around each daughter, as if shielding them from a threat. Elias finally found the strength to move forward, though his legs felt weak and clumsy beneath him. The girls looked up at him with wide, curious eyes that matched his own, unaware of how their existence was rewriting the entire meaning of his life. He opened his mouth to speak, but realized he didn't even know where to begin. The apology lodged in his throat felt too small to cover the magnitude of his sins. He finally managed to whisper, his voice broken and desperate. "Clara, are they?" Her eyes flashed with pain and accusation, and she straightened up to her full height, pulling the girl slightly behind her legs. "Yes," she replied softly, yet with a sharp edge that cut straight through his chest. "They're yours." She didn't shout. There was no dramatic scene, no raised voice. It was the silent truth that broke him far more efficiently than any anger ever could have. Elias searched for words, any words, but none came out. The reality crushed him like a wave, cold and heavy. He looked at the girls again, truly looked, and the similarities were undeniable. Both girls had his features, his expressions, the same spark in their eyes that once burned in his before he stifled it under ambition. They were 5 years old, 5 years of birthdays he missed, 5 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, and bedtime stories he wasn't there for. He remembered how his own parents had rarely shown up for him, too busy chasing their own careers, and a sick panic washed over him at the realization that he had done so much worse. He hadn't been absent by accident, but by choice. His voice was barely audible when he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" It wasn't an accusation, though it sounded dangerously close. It was a plea for a reason that would be easier to accept than the truth he already feared. Clara let out a shaky breath, and her fingers tightened protectively around Hazel's shoulder. "The day I tried to tell you, you made it very clear that I didn't matter," she said with painful calmness. "You walked away before I could say anything. I wasn't going to beg." Her voice cracked on the last word, despite her effort to remain composed. Elias flinched as if struck. He remembered that day now with searing clarity, his own cruel words echoing back to him like a court verdict. He had sentenced himself to this fate long before he even understood the consequences. Remorse ran through him violently, tinged with shame that left him breathless. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the apology sounding too small, inadequate for the ocean of pain he had inflicted. Clara looked at him, truly looked, and she saw not the powerful CEO she once loved, but a man suddenly stripped of his certainty and arrogance. Her expression softened only a fraction, but her anger was still there, boiling beneath every syllable. "Sorry doesn't change anything," she replied quietly. "They grew up without a father. I raised them alone. They don't know you. They don't even know your name." The girls tugged at her clothes, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source, and Clara gently stroked their hair to reassure them. Elias watched that gesture with a heartache so sharp he almost swayed. This was a family he had never known, a bond he had no right to break, but one he so desperately wanted to be a part of. Something inside him permanently shifted in that moment. The power, the success, the wealth. None of it mattered if he remained a stranger to the two hearts that should have been his greatest pride. He swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. Every word came out with raw sincerity. "I don't deserve a second chance," he admitted, "but I am begging you, let me try. Let me know them. Let me make up for what I can." His voice broke with the weight of that plea. He had never begged in his life. Pride had once been his shield, but now it lay shattered at his feet. Clara's expression mirrored an emotional storm. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was simply terrified. Terrified that allowing him near her daughters would mean risking everything she fought to protect. "I need time," she finally said, her voice a fragile thread. "I need to think about what is best for them." Elias nodded, accepting even that small mercy like a lifeline. Before he could say anything more, Hazel and Holly tugged at Clara's hands, wanting to go back to playing. Clara gave him one last look, one filled with unresolved questions and memories too painful to revisit. Then she turned away. Elias stood rooted to the spot as he watched them leave, his daughters looking back with curiosity over their shoulders, unaware that his entire destiny was being reformed by their gaze. The distance between them grew with every step, but Elias felt something new and powerful ignite within him, a determination he had never experienced before. He would not disappear again. He would not let go this time. He had already lost 5 years. He refused to lose another second. For the first time in his life, Elias Sterling understood what it meant to fight for something that truly mattered, and he intended to fight with everything he had. What do you think Elias's first concrete step should be to win Clara's trust? A big financial gesture, or something small and consistent? Comment below. Don't forget to share and subscribe for the next chapter of their redemption. Tu yet voi. Toi rat vui, vi ban bi kun hut by cotrian de kitting ve Elias, va Clara. Han trin chuk loi của Elias, và sự đấu tranh để tin tưởng của Clara là một thách thức lớn. Chapter 4. Earning Trust, One Day at a Time. If you are cheering for Elias to finally get it right, hit that like button. Earning trust is never easy, especially after a great betrayal. Watch how he fights for his family, and don't forget to subscribe. Part 4. The Quiet Siege on Distrust. Elias left the park that day a different man than the one who had entered. The world around him moved as usual, cars rushing past, children laughing, business meetings awaiting. But inside him, something had shifted so drastically, it felt as if the ground beneath his feet no longer belonged to him. Everything he had spent years building suddenly felt meaningless compared to the 5 years of life he missed with his daughters. He returned to his office, not to bury himself in work, but to sit in silence at his desk, as the same question repeated endlessly in his mind. What kind of man had he been to walk away from the very people who should have mattered most? Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hazel and Holly looking up at him with innocent curiosity and not understanding who he was. He pictured Clara's protective stance, the pain in her eyes, and the exhaustion she must have carried alone for years. Guilt consumed him until he could barely recognize the version of himself he had once been so proud of. He began reviewing old decisions, recalling every moment he pushed her away, every missed call when she tried to reach out before giving up completely. The crushing realization that she had tried, and he hadn't even listened, hit him in a way that success had never been able to fix. Elias spent weeks trying to earn even the smallest sliver of Clara's trust. He approached carefully, respecting her distance, sending texts instead of showing up unannounced, offering help without expecting gratitude. At first, Clara rejected everything. She had spent too many nights proving she didn't need him to survive. She didn't want the girls to attach themselves to someone who might leave again if life became inconvenient. Yet, Elias persisted, not with arrogance, but with a humility he had never known before. He asked about the girls' favorite snacks, their hobbies, their schedules. He offered to assist with school fees, medical checkups, anything that would lighten her load. Clara tested him repeatedly. She questioned his intentions. She demanded proof that his involvement wasn't a fleeting impulse fueled by guilt. Elias accepted every challenge she presented, determined to show he wasn't just trying to fix his conscience, but was ready to become a father in every sense. Slowly and cautiously, Clara allowed small interactions, starting with him meeting the girls in public places like playgrounds or coffee shops, where she remained close enough to intervene if anything went wrong. The first few encounters were awkward and tense. Hazel stared at him boldly, studying his face with the intense curiosity of a child trying to figure out something complicated. Holly stayed closer to Clara, grasping her hand tightly, peering out from behind her mother's hip. Elias didn't pressure. He sat on the grass, getting down to their level, and patiently waited while they continued to assess him. When he pulled out a coloring book and crayons, Hazel cautiously crept closer, dropping down beside him, as if challenging him to keep up with her imagination. Elias drew a clumsy cat, and she laughed at it, the sound so pure it hit him like sunlight cutting through a storm. Holly eventually joined them, positioning herself just to Elias's right, still watching him with a wary heart. He wasn't offended by her hesitation. If anything, he admired her caution, a trait she must have inherited from the resilience Clara had developed. When the meeting ended, the girls gave him small waves, tiny movements filled with a brand new familiarity. That simple gesture made Elias feel more victorious than signing any multi-million-dollar deal. The days turned into weeks, and Elias devoted more time to his daughters, prioritizing them above everything else. He reshuffled his schedule, canceled non-essential business trips, and let his assistant handle meetings that once demanded his full attention. He bought booster seats for his car, filled his phone with photos Clara sent of the girls' artwork and silly expressions. He learned their favorite cartoons, the name of the teddy bear Hazel refused to sleep without, and the exact way Holly liked her hair brushed. He learned that Hazel loved climbing and exploring, always running a little too far, while Holly collected small treasures like rocks and bottle caps that she guarded in an old lunchbox as if they were diamonds. For the first time since his childhood, Elias allowed himself to laugh without restraint, to feel without shame, to open his heart even when fear whispered he could still lose everything. The girls, despite their initial hesitation, began to trust him in precious increments. Their acceptance of him wasn't dramatic or sudden. It came through everyday moments, Hazel grasping his hand without thinking, Holly crawling onto his lap during a movie, both girls calling his name when something exciting happened and wanting him to see it too. Clara watched every interaction, her heart torn between happiness and panic. Seeing Elias love his daughters made a part of her ache in ways she wasn't prepared for. She had spent years convincing herself she was enough, that single motherhood was a strength. But now, seeing the way the girls' eyes lit up when Elias arrived, she realized how much they had missed, how much she had tried to protect them from wanting something she believed they could never have. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly emotional day where the girls begged Elias to stay longer, Clara asked to talk. He expected another boundary, another warning, but instead, she said something that terrified them both. She admitted she was afraid that he would leave again, afraid the girls would love him only to lose him, afraid that she, too, would love him again, and that the heartbreak would destroy her this time. Elias listened with his heart completely open. He didn't defend himself. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to justify his past. When she finally fell silent, bracing herself for his reply, he reached out and said he wouldn't leave. Not when things were hard. Not when people expected him to. Never again. He confessed that he had never been strong before. Not truly, because he ran away from the only person who ever made him want to be better. He told her the girls had changed him, that their existence taught him what love truly meant. Clara didn't instantly believe him, but she didn't reject him either. She simply whispered that she needed time, in the same way that he needed forgiveness. And without hesitation, Elias said he would wait. Whether it took months, years, or the rest of his life, he would wait. Because for the first time, he understood that love wasn't something earned through success or status. It was built through showing up, over and over again, even when fear threatened to tear everything apart. He had already lost 5 years. He wouldn't lose them again. Interactive question. What do you think is the biggest mistake Elias needs to avoid making right now to solidify Clara's trust? Is his honesty enough, or does he need to take a concrete step regarding his corporate life? Let us know in the comments. Part 5. The Storm and the Unbreakable. Bond. Elias never imagined that learning to be a father would feel like entering a brand new world, where every emotion was magnified, every mistake felt monumental, and every success filled his chest with a warmth he had never known. He threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he once reserved for business. But this time, the stakes were far more personal. He quickly learned that raising 2 spirited 5-year-old girls was both chaotic and miraculous, a constant roller coaster of spilled juice, tangled hair, laughter that could erase the worst day, and tears that could reduce him to panic in seconds. He quickly learned that the children didn't care about his powerful reputation or intimidating presence. What they cared about was whether he showed up, whether he got down on the floor instead of hovering above their world, whether he listened when they spoke in their fast, excited voices about dreams that made no logical sense. At first, every interaction felt like a test he was doomed to fail. Hazel pushed boundaries, darting ahead in grocery stores, or climbing anything taller than herself, forcing Elias to chase after her with a frantic urgency that made onlookers smile knowingly. Holly needed reassurance at nearly every turn, clinging to his sleeve if strangers walked too close, or asking him to check the closet 3 times before bedtime. Elias had to learn patience, gentle guidance, and how to kneel to eye level so Holly wouldn't feel overwhelmed. He found himself reading parenting articles at 2 in the morning, highlighting sections on emotional support, communication, and trauma caused by absence. Every mistake weighed heavily on him. The first time the girls called him Daddy, the words sounded hesitant, as if they were afraid to speak it freely. Elias spent the rest of the evening sitting on their living room sofa, staring into the dark, overwhelmed by gratitude and guilt, so tightly woven he couldn't pull them apart. Clara watched his efforts with silent wariness. Trust did not grow quickly for her, but she saw how Elias shifted his priorities without hesitation. Every afternoon, he arrived early at the park or activity center where they met, often carrying their favorite snacks and greeting them with a smile that reached his eyes. He celebrated their smallest accomplishments as if they were major victories, clapping wildly when Hazel mastered a new climbing bar and kneeling proudly when Holly read her first full sentence from a children's book. There were moments when Clara caught him looking at his daughters with a love so pure and aching that it cut her breath, because she recognized that look. It was the one she once wished he would give her. One rainy evening, everything shifted in a way neither of them predicted. Clara had allowed Elias to take the girls to the playground alone for the first time, wanting to foster the bond they were still building. The evening was supposed to be simple, filled with swings and fairy tale games. But a sudden summer storm rolled in, bringing heavy claps of thunder that terrified Holly. The child darted away in panic, running straight toward the darkening trees. Hazel called out, but Holly was too afraid to hear. Elias chased her with a fear that tore him apart, more violently than anything he had faced in the business world. He finally caught up to her behind a thick shrub where she was crouched, crying, covering her ears as thunder boomed overhead. He sank to his knees, his suit drenched by the sudden rain, and wrapped her in his arms, whispering soft words and shielding her from every rumble. He wasn't calm or composed. He was terrified, his heart hammering, scared to lose her in a way that went far beyond physical danger. When Holly finally looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and wrapped her arms around his neck, Elias realized that trust wasn't something earned through perfect actions, but through showing up during the messy, scary moments, when love meant staying even in the storm. By the time Clara rushed over, hair plastered and panic visible in her trembling hands, she found Holly curled against Elias's chest, while Hazel clung to his arm for comfort. The sight of her daughters choosing him as their safety shook her heart deeper than she expected. Clara thanked him with a voice she could barely keep steady, and Elias simply nodded, afraid any word might cause him to crumble. Driving home that night, Clara relived the scene in her mind over and over, realizing he had been there when it mattered most. She saw how his hands still shook long after the girls were calm, how he looked at them as if they were the most fragile, precious treasures in the world. A part of her, the part she had tried so hard to bury, began to soften in ways she wasn't ready to admit. Over time, Clara learned to share responsibilities with him. He began helping with bedtime routines, reading stories where his deep voice brought dragons and princesses to life. Holly started falling asleep curled up next to him, comforted by the steady rhythm of his breathing. Hazel insisted he tuck her in last, claiming she needed the strongest hug before bed. On certain nights, after the girls were safely dreaming, Clara and Elias would sit together in the living room, talking in hushed tones about school plans, future birthdays, and challenges the girls might face. Those conversations were cautious yet intimate, like two people learning to trust language again, without letting old wounds speak too loudly. Elias often looked at Clara with a mix of admiration and remorse, seeing her not as the girl he once walked away from, but as a woman who survived heartbreak and turned it into the warm, loving environment his daughters thrived in. He wondered if she knew how extraordinary she was, how her strength humbled him every single day. Sometimes she would catch him looking at her with that expression, and she would quickly look away, afraid of what it meant. Deep down, they both understood the path they were on was delicate. Past pain still lingered like a shadow between them, but something new was quietly growing underneath. Something hopeful, something terrifying, something that might heal everything or destroy them completely. Clara still carried fear, but she also carried a spark of possibility. Elias carried regret, but he also carried a love so fierce it left no room for abandonment ever again. The girls were learning what it felt like to be a family for the first time. Elias was learning what it meant to be worthy of one. And Clara was learning that healing didn't mean forgetting, but allowing herself to believe in a future she once thought impossible. They were changing together, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Part 6. The Proposal for Forever. Time continued to move, blending days into weeks as the fragile structure of trust was slowly rebuilt. But even as Elias became a constant part of their lives, Clara carried a fear she couldn't silence. The fear crept into her thoughts in the quiet hours of the night. What if he leaves again? What if this is temporary? What if the girls give him their whole hearts only to watch him walk away the moment responsibility became too heavy? Elias understood he would always be walking through a minefield of distrust when it came to Clara. Every mistake he made felt magnified. Every hesitation became a reminder of the past. He sought help in ways he once believed were beneath him. He attended therapy, determined to dismantle the emotional armor he wore for so long. He unpacked his upbringing, where affection was rare, where success equaled love, where career goals were the only thing that earned praise. He confronted fears he didn't know he carried, finding out how deeply he had equated vulnerability with danger. He learned that opening his heart to love didn't make him weak. Shutting love out did. Meanwhile, Clara began to notice subtle changes in him that she couldn't ignore. He never missed a day with the girls, even when he was sick or exhausted. He showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, every dance recital and sports event, cheering with the loudest voice in the room. He was there not only during celebrations, but also through tantrums, scraped knees, and feverish nights. Always patient, always present, always learning. One evening, after the girls were tucked into bed, Clara found Elias still in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a children's book open on his lap. He looked heartbreakingly sincere and tired, dark circles forming under his eyes from long days juggling work and fatherhood. But he also carried a soft contentment she had never seen on him before. Without thinking, Clara joined him on the sofa, leaving a comfortable space between them, and they began to talk quietly. She confessed that every time she saw him care for their daughters, something inside her shifted in a way she couldn't control. He listened intently, not interrupting, giving her space to say everything she had swallowed for years. When she finished, preparing for his response, he reached out and said he wouldn't leave. Not when things were hard. Not when people expected him to. Never again. He confessed that he had never been truly strong until now. He told her the girls had changed him, that their existence taught him what love truly meant. Clara didn't instantly believe him, but she didn't reject him either. She simply whispered that she needed time, in the same way that he needed forgiveness. And without hesitation, Elias said he would wait. Weeks later, Clara invited Elias to their apartment for dinner, marking a significant change in their dynamic. It was the first time the girls saw both parents sitting at the same table, sharing food, laughter, and stories like a family that never crumbled. As the girls played after dinner, Clara and Elias stood near the kitchen sink, cleaning dishes side by side. The simple domesticity of the moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Clara finally dared to say that she didn't want to run anymore, that she could see the man he was now, and that her heart no longer refused to feel. Elias exhaled shakily. Relief flooded his expression, and he told her she deserved happiness and peace, and that he wanted to spend his life providing both, if she would allow it. Elias knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Clara, long before he gathered the courage to put that desire into words. He had lost them once because he chose comfort over courage. He wouldn't repeat that mistake now. He planned his proposal with a care rooted not in extravagance, but in meaning, wanting every second to reflect how much his heart had changed and how deeply he treasured the family forming around him. He asked Clara if they could take the girls to the Central Park Conservatory Garden one warm Saturday afternoon. A place full of winding paths, bright flowers, and fountains glittering in the sun. Clara agreed, unaware of the ring hidden in his pocket, the promise waiting to unfold. The twins skipped ahead of them, holding hands and laughing at butterflies fluttering in the air, while Clara and Elias walked closely behind, their fingers brushing now and then in ways that sent soft waves of warmth through both of them. They reached a secluded garden filled with soft pink roses and a small pond, where koi fish glided lazily through the clear water. The girls ran to the edge, excitedly pointing at the fish, while Elias guided Clara to a wooden bench beneath a flowered archway. He turned to face her, his expression no longer casual, but overflowing with an emotion she felt even before he spoke. Her heart began to flutter inside her chest, sensing something momentous approaching. Elias told her that there were moments in his life when he believed success required emotional armor. Moments when he convinced himself that love was a weakness he couldn't afford. He admitted that walking away from her had been the biggest mistake he would ever make, one that haunted him every day until he found her again. He said meeting his daughters changed the entire structure of his soul, and that they taught him what love truly meant, to love deeply, even when it terrified him. He reached for the small velvet box in his pocket, his hands trembling, not from fear of rejection, but from the sheer weight of hope pressing against his heart. Clara's breath caught in her throat as Elias sank onto one knee in front of her. It felt unreal, as if the universe were stitching all her broken pieces back together, right there, beneath the blooming arch. The twins turned to look. Their eyes widened with excitement, sensing this moment was important. Elias held out the open box, revealing a delicate ring that sparkled like captured sunlight. But it was his voice that held the true beauty of the moment. He told her he didn't want to erase the past, because the past shaped the strength she carried, and the love she held so fiercely. He promised he would spend the rest of his life proving he was now the man she deserved, a man who would never choose ambition over family again. He asked her to marry him, not just for his happiness, but because he wanted to be the husband she could lean on, the father their daughters could always count on, and the partner whose loyalty would never fail again. His voice cracked as he told her he loved her, not as a confession from a desperate man, but as a truth that would guide everything he did from this moment forward. Clara's tears fell freely, her heart swelling with more love than she thought she was ever capable of feeling. All the years of fighting alone, all the nights questioning if she would ever find light after the heartbreak, suddenly made sense, because they had led her back to the place where love could finally bloom without fear. She said yes, her voice full of hope. shaky but certain. The twins squealed and launched themselves into their parents' arms, enveloping the four of them in a group hug that felt like a promise sealed, not just by words, but by a bond that would never again be broken. Their journey had not been perfect. It had been painful, messy, overwhelming, and scary. But because they fought through every hardship, instead of surrendering, they emerged stronger than before. They learned that sometimes love doesn't come without flaws. Sometimes it returns after being broken, determined to rebuild itself into something unbreakable. The life they created was proof that love can survive mistakes, that forgiveness can grow where pain once reigned, and that second chances are worth risking everything for when the heart finally chooses what truly matters. Their family was no longer divided by the past. Their future now belonged to all four of them. What an emotional journey. Do you believe Elias has truly earned his second chance with Clara and the girls? Tell us what you loved most about their ending in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of redemption and love.